now. So like 9:50-ish.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay, and then there you go. You guys should be good to go ahead and start. So like 9:50-ish. Okay. Yes.
Sounds good.
All right then.
All right, Your Honor, before we begin, the plaintiff would like to start with some pretrial matters.
Go ahead.
First, we'd like to constructively tender documents to the bench. I believe the bench book has been provided to you and contains relevant case materials such as the stipulations, special instructions, case law in the state of Midlands, and other relevant Midland codes. The plaintiff would also like to bring to your attention Stipulation 1, which stipulates that all exhibits have been pre-numbered and pre-labeled. This means that Exhibit 5 may be entered before Exhibit 1 and vice versa. We would then like to bring to your Honor's attention Rules 603 and 615. Pursuant to Rule 603, we would request that all witnesses are recognized as pre-sworn to testify truthfully.
Any objections by the defense?
No, Your Honor.
Then it is so invoked.
And pursuant to Rule 615, we would request that Your Honor recognizes all witnesses as constructively sequestered, except for the defense's designated party representative.
All right. Defense, at this time, would you like to designate a party representative?
Yes, Your Honor. Our party representative will be Harper Martini.
All right, it is so noted.
As well, would Your Honor prefer that we state whenever we constructively approach the witnesses, opposing counsel, and the bench?
No need to do all that.
Yes, Your Honor. And lastly, the plaintiff will make appearances. My name is Mackenzie Porter, and I'm joined by my co-counsel, Haley Huggins, and my co-counsel, Camden Vokey.
Good evening, Your Honor.
All right, with that, we have no further pretrial matters, Your Honor.
All right. Defense, do you have any further pretrial matters?
Yes, Your Honor. May the defense make appearances?
Yes.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Dave Pritchett, and today I'm joined by my co-counsel, Miss Alyssa Villarreal.
Good evening, Your Honor.
And Miss Rachel Medina.
Good evening, Your Honor.
And today we're going to be representing the defendant in today's case. That would be Harper Martini.
Good evening, Your Honor.
We have a few more pretrial matters to attend to before proceeding, Your Honor. Is that fine with you?
Yes, of course.
First, to direct your attention to some case law on page 1 underneath battery. We'd like for you to note Burdett v. Copenhagen, 1975, which states that the plaintiff must prove 3 different elements in battery. First is that an action was made by the defendant. Second is that that action was made for offensive contact or harmful intent. And third is that that action was made to the plaintiff.
Okay, it is noted.
And a second pretrial matter I'd like for you to attend to, Your Honor, also case law underneath burden of proof. That should be on page 3.
Okay.
I'd like for you to note Diffendifer v. Schroeder 2018, which states that the plaintiff must prove its elements by a preponderance of the evidence.
Okay.
And we'd also like for you to note Stipulation 3, which states that all exhibits between 1 and 10 have been pre-admitted and both parties waive that they may be used during opening statements.
All right, that is noted.
And Your Honor, seeing this our first time practicing before your court, whenever we make an objection, may we assume it's heard out of the earshot of the jury?
You may.
And may we assume that any objections that are sustained, the testimony is stricken, or must we motion to do so?
Make a motion to do so.
Yes, Your Honor. And would you have us ask for your permission to post different exhibits and affidavits on screen, or may we do so freely?
Ask for permission before doing so.
Yes, Your Honor. And finally, may we assume that you want us to stand during statements and closing arguments, or would you prefer us to sit?
I have no preference. Whatever is most comfortable for you.
Yes, Your Honor. And with that, the defense is ready to proceed.
All right, then. Plaintiff, you may proceed with opening statements.
Your Honor, may it please the court. I am afraid that Harper is going to kill me. These were some of Genesis Petrillo's final words. As the plaintiff today, we hold the burden of proof. The burden in today's case is by a preponderance of the evidence. Simply put, more likely than not to have occurred. And it's important to note that battery is not murder. The bar is much lower. Battery is the intent to cause harm. We must prove to you today that the defendant, more likely than not, purposefully mixed pesticide into a Cara wine bottle and then gifted that wine bottle to Genesis Petrillo with the intent to cause any harm. The defendant hated Genesis from the beginning. Genesis was in a relationship with the defendant's only child, Casey. The defendant thought Genesis wasn't good enough. The defendant thought that Genesis was a terrible influence. The defendant thought that they should have never been together. The defendant thought that Genesis should just disappear. In fact, there was nothing more that the defendant wanted. For years throughout Casey and Genesis's relationship, tensions grew between the defendant and Genesis. Despite rising tensions, the couple then got engaged. And the defendant was in a very vulnerable place prior to the wedding. The defendant believed they were losing their only child. Genesis and Casey planned to leave the country after their wedding. Casey was always supposed to take over the family winery, but that wasn't going to happen anymore with Genesis's plans. The defendant's relationship with Casey had been in jeopardy for as long as Genesis was around, but this was going to be the final straw. The defendant decided that the only way to stay in their child's life was to get rid of Genesis. The clock is ticking. A wedding date was set. Genesis made clear to the defendant that this date would be the end of their interactions, that not only Casey and Genesis planned to move out of the country, but they planned to cease contact altogether. The defendant's first attempt was to convince Casey that this relationship wasn't right, that it wasn't going to last. The defendant then briefly attempted to mend the broken relationship with Genesis. When that failed, the defendant resorted to offering $300,000 for Genesis to abandon Casey. It didn't work. Time was running out. The defendant was desperate. The defendant looked to a last resort. On June 7th, the night of the rehearsal dinner, the defendant placed pesticide used heavily in the winery inside a Cara wine bottle. This wine bottle was then personally gifted to Genesis under the excuse of making amends. It was the defendant's final attempt to save not only their family, but their business, and it was solved. The defendant would have protected Casey from what they saw as a mistake and saved the future of their business. You'll hear from the defendant's son, Casey, today. Casey will tell you about the plan to move, about the tensions rising all the way to the wedding date. You'll hear from Lonnie Paris, a journalist and investigator. Lonnie will tell you how the two were fighting the very night Genesis was poisoned. She will tell you how she found an empty bottle of pesticide in the wine bottling area. You will hear from Angel Rodriguez, a close friend of Genesis and Casey. Angel will tell you about how Harper wanted Genesis to just disappear. Angel will tell you how Harper had a can of bug-off pesticide special just for Genesis because he's such a pest. Angel will tell you about how Genesis died shortly after drinking the gifted wine. It's important to know that when the defendant was notified at the wedding that someone at the wedding rehearsal had been hospitalized, they didn't ask who. In fact, the only thing the defendant did say was, Genesis got poisoned? Well, I guess we'll have to cancel the wedding. The defendant then went into Genesis's bedroom to dispose of the evidence. The defendant had the access. The pesticide that killed Genesis was one that the defendant is not only familiar with, but uses daily. The defendant had the motive. With everything on the line, the defendant had nothing to lose. Blinded by desperation, they felt they had no other choice. There was no effort left to make, no time left to give, nowhere else to turn. Backed into a corner, the defendant made a deadly choice. At the end of today's trial, the plaintiff is confident that you will find the defendant liable.
All right. Thank you. Defense, are you ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Your Honor, opposing counsels, member of the jury, may it please the court. Bad blood is not battery. Members of the jury, today you are going to learn about what a mother is willing to do for her son. Casey Soto and Genesis Petrillo were two young adults madly in love with one another. The two were inseparable. They met in college and were so committed to each other that they decided to take the next step in their relationship and get engaged. However, from the moment Mr. Petrillo met Miss Martini, there was trouble in their relationship. Mr. Petrillo continually made disrespectful comments about the wine produced at Miss Martini's locally owned winery, Peony Estates. Later, Mr. Petrillo even went as far as to threaten to take Miss Martini's only child all the way to France, thousands of miles away from Miss Martini. Even though these trials were persistent, Miss Martini continually tried to amend her relationship with Mr. Petrillo. Miss Martini personally invited Mr. Petrillo to lunch to try to resolve their issues. She even went as far as to pay for the entire wedding. When Mr. Petrillo and Mr. Soto made the decision to move all the way to France, Miss Martini continued to show her support by doing everything in her power to ensure the happy couple had the perfect wedding day. On June 7th, 2019, the night of the rehearsal dinner, Miss Martini gave Mr. Petrillo a bottle of her most expensive wine called Cara. This was another one of Miss Martini's continual attempts to try to make amends. The bottle of Cara resembled a peace offering and new beginnings for the soon-to-be family. Members of the jury, today you're going to hear a lot about how Mr. Petrillo had more to drink than the bottle of Cara. And on June 8th, 2019, Genesis Petrillo sadly passed away from suspected pesticide poisoning. You're also going to hear about the bad relationship between Miss Martini and Mr. Petrillo. In fact, that may be all the plaintiff tells you today. But today, we're going to show you through the evidence that the bad blood between these two is not battery. Today, you're going to hear from three witnesses. First, you will hear from Dr. Cannon, a toxicology expert with years of experience as a doctor and a medical consultant. Dr. Cannon is going to talk to you about how the possibility of pesticide poisoning is not limited to the bottle of Cara. Next, you will hear from Austin Lewis. Mr. Lewis, who worked at Peony Estates, is going to tell you how pesticides were used. He is also going to tell you that Miss Martini would never do anything to hurt her own son. And lastly, you will hear from Miss Martini herself. She's going to tell you that even though she had trouble with Mr. Petrillo, she continued to do everything in her power to make her son happy. As the defense, we have no burden to prove in today's case. The burden lies solely on the plaintiff. It is the plaintiff who must prove to you by a preponderance of the evidence that Miss Martini is liable for battery. And in order for the plaintiff to do that, they must prove three elements to you today. First, the plaintiff must prove to you that Miss Martini committed an act. Next, the plaintiff must prove to you that Miss Martini's act was intended to cause harm. And finally, the plaintiff must also prove to you that in result, Mr. Petrillo suffered harm. Although the plaintiff will try to make this look simple, know that it is not. Members of the jury, Do not get distracted by the story the plaintiff is going to tell you today, because it's nothing more than that, a story. At the end of today's trial, my co-counselor, Rachel Medina, will come before you, and she will ask you to find Miss Martini not liable for battery, because bad blood is not battery. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Plaintiff, may I call your first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff would like to call Casey Soto to the stand.
All right.
Can you please introduce yourself to the court?
Yes, my name's Casey Soto.
Can you tell me why you're here today?
Unfortunately, I was subpoenaed, but I'm here to talk about everything that happened with Genesis and the wedding, and I guess specifically with my mother, Harper Martini.
How would you describe your relationship with Harper?
I would say emotionally charged. It was just the two of us when I was growing up. I know Harper invested all of her energy into raising me and would often tell me how I was all she had left. I mean, the way the situation has ended up it's upsetting.
What do you mean by this?
I mean, well, throughout my whole life, Harper would sometimes take things a little too far, even though it was well-intentioned, but it was no exception when Genesis came into my life.
How did you and Genesis meet?
It was actually at a celebration. Our mutual friend Drew was having it at Rosie and Pedro. After we met up for lunch, and eventually we decided to call it official, and we dated for 3 years before I introduced him to Harper.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff would like to ask permission to screen share a demo.
Okay.
All right, if our box could, amazing. All right. Okay, moving forward, Mr. Soto. How did so how you and Genesis met? So did you ever introduce your mother to Genesis?
Yeah, but it took me about 3 years to do that.
And how did that go?
Not as great as I wanted it to be. There was a bad first interaction that just seemed to never end, but things with Genesis and I were really good. So good, even the fact that Genesis proposed to me, actually.
And where did Genesis and Harper meet for the first time?
At Peony Estates.
And what is Peony Estates exactly?
It's the winery my mother owns.
Going back a little bit, did you expect Genesis to propose to you?
I actually had been planning to propose to him first, but he beat me to it.
And what happened after the two of you were engaged?
Things got objectively worse between Harper and Genesis.
How so?
Well, Genesis hadn't told Harper of his plans to propose, so I think that caught her off guard. When Harper got freaked out, we decided to just handle the wedding plans ourselves.
And when was your engagement to Genesis Petrillo?
I'm sorry?
When was your engagement to Genesis Petrillo?
It was in May of 2018.
Amazing. Can you describe a little bit of the wedding planning process?
Yeah, originally Genesis and I had the venue set at Rosie and Pedro Winery. It was supposed to be kind of symbolic because that's where we initially founded our love. But
you say originally, did this location change?
Well, yes. Harper made us an offer. She wanted us to have it at her own winery, Peony Estates. If we agreed, then she was going to pay for a large portion of the wedding.
And what ended up happening with that wedding offer?
Well, we initially took it because Genesis had actually gotten a job offer in France, and we thought as a saving opportunity for the wedding costs.
When were the two of you going to make this move to Paris?
shortly after the wedding, actually.
Was Harper aware of these plans?
Yes, not initially at first, no.
And why is that?
Well, I knew better to tell Harper before we actually made the move. I wanted to wait until after we'd be able, or we would be too far away from Harper to stop us.
What made you believe that Harper would try to stop you?
Um, let's put things in perspective. I've been Harper's son my whole life. I knew that she was attached to the idea of me running the winery one day, but I never wanted to do that. It was never my intention to run the family business. It made it hard, and I felt like I was running out of time to tell Harper my true feelings.
When did Harper find out about your plans to move?
During the process of the wedding plans, there was a tense interaction. Genesis have actually left a drunk voicemail to Harper, mentioning our plans to move, among other things. This actually at the casino party.
And would you recognize this voicemail?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, we have the plaintiff asks permission to screen share and enter Exhibit 8, which has been previously admitted based on Stipulation 3.
Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Soto, could you read for me the part in this voicemail starting with, "It's time for Harper to be an adult"? I think it's halfway.
It's time for Harper to be an adult and know the truth. Casey, me, our future kids, your grandkids, we're all going to live our lives as far away from you as possible. You never see any of us. You don't deserve us.
Your Honor, we asked to stop screen sharing the exhibit and screen share the timeline once again.
Right.
And how did Harper react to hearing this voicemail?
Not good. She screamed about needing someone to take over the family business, and especially the hopeful part was that Harper said it was terrible of me to leave her without any other family.
Did anything else happen during this interaction?
Harper did threaten Genesis, a threat that was just full of disappointment or disapproval that we were just used to at this point from her. She just said stuff like how I was staying at Bitlands no matter what.
And when did this interaction happen?
That was in May before the wedding was set to happen. The tension was still there. So June 2019, the month of the wedding rolled around.
Can you describe some of this tension that you're talking about?
Yeah. During one of the arguments between Genesis and Harper at the rehearsal dinner, I remember Genesis saying that Harper couldn't even pay him off, which really confused me at the
Objection,
time.
Your Honor, hearsay.
Response?
May I respond, Your Honor? I believe that this hearsay statement can fall under the exception of 803.2, an excited utterance. This statement was of Genesis Petrillo, and it was during an argument when they were arguing and the tensions were very high, and this was something that Genesis was saying in like a very excited state, and therefore is more likely to be true than in another normal state.
Response?
Your Honor, this statement was offered out of court by someone who is not the party opponent, seeing as the plaintiff does not have one, and it is not an exception to hearsay.
The plaintiff specifically mentioned 803.2 excited utterance. What's your response to that?
Your Honor, it was a conversation that it was a. I'm sorry, Your Honor. Did you say 801.2?
No, 803.2. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
My apologies. May I confer to co-counsel for a moment?
Go ahead.
Your Honor, my response to opposing counsel is that this was not an excited utterance. This was actually said during a conversation. And in a conversation, it cannot be an exception to hearsay under 803.2 because in a regular conversation, there is no stress or tension that occurs. It is just a conversation. It's not an excited utterance.
I tend to disagree. I'm going to overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Soto, can you describe what happened next?
Yes. After everything just seemed really chaotic, I just was ready to cancel the wedding at this point.
Did the wedding get canceled?
Well, Harper kept going on about how canceling the wedding would be such a good idea and that I would stay at Midlands with her. But the wedding wasn't canceled, and not at first. I mean, when Genesis was still alive, the wedding was still going to happen.
And what was the next event that happened during the wedding process?
We actually had the rehearsal dinner.
And when was this?
This was the night of June 7th.
Can you describe this night for me a little bit?
Sure. There was a lot of congratulations speeches. Harper gave a toast and gave a bottle of wine to Genesis. It was actually part of Harper's new wine named Cara.
And what happened after that?
The toast came as a bit of a shock to me, but the night went on and I eventually wanted to go to bed.
Mr. Soto, can you tell me about the next morning?
I first heard from Harper that something was wrong. At first, it was just that Genesis was missing. But then I later was informed by Angel Rodriguez that he was actually in a coma.
What happened after that?
We went to the hospital and unfortunately we didn't make it in time.
What do you mean?
We got to the hospital at 9:32 a.m. Genesis died at 9:27.
Mr. Soto, did you ever find out how your fiance died?
Yes, I requested the medical reports and the death certificate after the funeral. I felt like I had the right to know what actually happened to Genesis.
Would you recognize a copy of this death certificate?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, the plaintiff asks to permission to screen share and enter Exhibit 8, which has already also been admitted based on Stipulation 3.
Go ahead.
Mr. Soto, could you tell me from this report, how did Genesis Petrillo die?
It was made clear.
Objection, Your Honor. Objection, Your Honor. Rule 602, a lack of foundation. The opposing counsel has not established how Mr. Soto is qualified to speak on this exhibit.
Your response to that?
May I respond, Your Honor? This is part of one of the exhibits that has already been entered into evidence previously, and my witness does have knowledge of this exhibit as stated in the affidavit, and merely my witness is not going to go into the medical technicalities, but really just the information that he learned from reading this, as it is very, it is relevant to the death and what we have just laid the foundation of the events that are happening, and how Casey Soto came to be in contact of this document as a grieving husband.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Hold on. Plaintiff, did you lay the foundation that this witness knows this exhibit?
May I ask a few more questions just to make sure that my witness knows this? I guess.
Please go ahead.
Your Honor, I also would like to point out that this is Exhibit 7 and opposing counsel has mentioned Exhibit 8. I would ask that opposing counsel either ask to refer to Exhibit 7 or display the correct exhibit.
I believe plaintiff mentioned Exhibit 7. But regardless, we're going to hear a little more foundation from Mr. Soto here. So for now, objection sustained, and just ask a few more questions.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Soto, what is this document?
Document 7?
Yes.
It's Genesis death certificate.
And are you familiar with this document?
Yes, I requested them shortly after the funeral.
And could you tell me from this report, how did Genesis Petrillo die?
It was made clear to me that he ingested pesticides from the wine, which was the most likely source of poisoning.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Great. Defense,
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed with the cross?
you may.
Now, Mr. Soto, it is true that you are here involuntarily, correct?
Yes, and you can just call me Casey.
I actually would like to speak with you about when you met Mr. Petrillo. You met him in 2012 at a party your friend invited you to,
Yes, at Rosie and Pedro's winery.
and Mr. Petrillo got drunk that night at the party.
Yes.
But you two started dating a month or so later.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Soto, you were raised by a single parent, is that right?
That's correct.
And she took care of you all on her own.
Yes, she did.
She made you the #1 priority.
Yes.
Harper Martini was a good mother, wasn't she?
Yes.
And yet you waited 3 years into your relationship when you finally decided to bring Mr. Petrillo home to meet your mother.
Yes, that's true.
And when Mr. Petrillo proposed in 2018, he had given no notice or warning to your mother, correct?
No, he hadn't.
She had no idea that it was going to happen and was caught off guard.
Yes.
But still, she helped you to plan your wedding.
I'm sorry.
She helped you plan your,
Yes.
and she even offered to pay for a significant portion of it.
Yes, to have it at Peony Estates.
Now, your mother also mentioned that business was down at Peony Estates, correct?
Yeah, they were having some financial issues.
And she also mentioned to you that she needed the good press.
Of my wedding?
Yes.
Yes.
So she was hands-on helping to plan your wedding
Yes, she took front seat.
because she wanted everything to be perfect for you and your wedding day.
Objection, Your Honor. Calls for speculation. I believe that opposing counsel is asking my witness to delve into the mindset of Harper Martini and know exactly her intentions when my witness cannot testify to that.
Your Honor, may I respond?
No need. If the witness doesn't know the defendant's state of mind, they can say so, but I won't sustain speculation objections on cross-examination. Overruled.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Soto, I'm going to re-ask my question. Your mother wanted everything to be perfect for you and your wedding day, correct?
Yes.
But Mr. Petrillo didn't like her significant involvement, did he?
I would say they had a few arguments about certain things about the.
Yes, and Mr. Petrillo actually called Miss Martini to talk about their difference of opinion.
Yes, that's true.
And then in a later phone call while intoxicated, Mr. Petrillo let it slip to your mother that you were moving across the globe to France.
Yes.
And that surprised your mother yet again with another important detail in your life.
That is correct.
Now, I want to talk about the rehearsal dinner. Your mother gave 2 toasts that night, correct?
Yes.
And the second one, she tried to make amends.
Sure.
She presented Mr. Petrillo with a bottle of wine,
Yes.
and she did so in front of the entire room.
Yes.
Now, after the toasts were over, you left for bed early, correct?
Yes, I was exhausted with the whole event.
Now, Mr. Soto, you never saw pesticide near the bottle of wine, is that correct?
No, I haven't.
And you did not see what or how much Genesis drank that night?
No.
You have no idea what happened after you left that night, correct?
Nope.
So there is no way for you to know just how much Mr. Petrillo had to drink once you left.
No.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor.
All right, Mr. Soto, you're excused. Plaintiff, call your next witness.
At this time, we call Lonnie Paris. Can you introduce yourself for the court today?
My name is Lonnie Paris, and I'm an investigative journalist. I also have a master's degree in science journalism that just perfectly encompasses my passions of journalism and environmental science.
And why are you testifying here today?
I have been extremely dedicated to covering this case in depth, so I'm here to provide my testimony as to what I've witnessed.
Can you tell me about how you learned about Peony Estates?
Of course. I got a tip from Danny Francasio, the owner of Rosie and Pedro's Winery, stating that Peony Estates was committing several health code violations through their misuse of pesticide.
Do you receive tips like this often?
Tips are pretty common given my reputation. I have businesses constantly contacting me with potential stories, claiming how their rivals are engaging in every illicit activity under the sun. But because of that, I have to take these tips with a grain of salt.
Did you take this tip seriously?
Unfortunately, I didn't. There usually isn't a legitimate story behind them, but I was intrigued by the prospect of Peony Estates producing poisoned wine. I searched the internet to see if I could find anything, but there was nothing about anyone getting sick, so I pushed this project to the back burner.
Were you at the winery on June 7th, 2019?
I was. This was the day of the rehearsal and rehearsal dinner.
And what were you doing there?
Well, I had been caught sneaking in before, so this time I put on a new disguise, this time as a member of the catering staff. I easily made my way to the restricted area where I easily unlocked the padlock and entered the bottling area.
And what did you find in the bottling area?
There was a single bottle of wine sitting on a shelf with no other bottles around it. It said Cara on the label. Then suddenly I heard loud shouting.
Who was yelling?
At first it was hard to hear, but as I made my way closer down the hallway, I could tell that there were two voices. They belonged to Harper Martini and Genesis Petrillo. I had been around them previously.
Objection, Your Honor. Lack of foundation.
You mind explaining a little more?
Yes, Your Honor. We haven't heard how this witness is familiar with either of these two voices, and especially we haven't heard how they'd be familiar with the shouting of these two particular individuals.
Response?
Your Honor, we've already established that Lonnie Paris has been investigating the winery for quite some time. Lonnie Paris also laid the foundation by saying she heard them both speak earlier during the rehearsal dinner, and it hasn't been disputed that they were there that day.
Response, Your Honor?
Go ahead.
We haven't argued that they were or were not there at the winery at that time. What we're arguing is that Miss Paris would be able to recognize their shouting and screaming at this time. And simply being able to tell later on still doesn't lay foundation for now at this moment. Their timeline is simply misconstrued and it's not laying proper foundation for this particular moment.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Go ahead.
I do not believe that it is a reach that a witness may testify that they heard voices of others speaking of whom they've encountered earlier on in the day. We've laid that foundation.
I tend to agree. I'll go ahead and overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Could you tell us who was yelling in the bottling area?
It was Harper Martini and Genesis Petrillo.
And could you tell us what they were arguing about?
I'm not really sure. They had left the room once I had gotten close enough.
Did you go into the room?
Yes, because I saw a crumpled up envelope on the floor.
And what did you do once seeing the envelope?
Well, my curiosity got the best of me and I just had to open it. And inside was a letter addressed to Genesis Petrillo. I realized at this point that I'd stumbled onto something huge, so I quickly took a picture of the letter and put it right back where I found it because I heard footsteps coming my way.
And what happened next?
Well, I hid obviously, and that's when I saw Harper come back into the room and pick the letter up.
What did the defendant then do with this letter?
Harper said, I forgot that I should get rid of this after Genesis tossed it back in my face. Then Harper burned it in a furnace nearby.
Who wrote this letter?
Harper Martini.
How do you know that?
Objection, Your Honor. Facts not in evidence.
Your Honor, we're laying the foundation to enter this into evidence.
Response, Your Honor.
No need. I will give the plaintiff a little leeway to lay the foundation.
Yes, Your Honor.
Overruled.
How do you know who wrote it?
In addition to Harper's initials being at the end of the letter and Harper's statements that I had overheard, I was able to recognize Harper's handwriting based on some earlier investigation in Harper's office. See, Harper had several handwritten Post-it notes stuck to Harper's desk.
Would you recognize a copy of this exhibit?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, permission to screen share with you, opposing counsel, and the witness what has been previously marked as Exhibit 24.
You may.
Do you recognize this document?
Yes,
Is it a fair and accurate copy?
it is.
Has it been changed or altered in any other way?
No.
Your Honor, the plaintiff offers Exhibit 24 into evidence.
Any objections?
No objections, Your Honor.
It is so admitted.
Who is this letter addressed to?
Genesis Petria.
Objection, Your Honor. Cumulative.
No, I'm going to overrule.
Yes, Your Honor.
And can you read the fourth sentence out loud for me?
Yes. Otherwise, I will take you out of the picture the hard way.
What did the defendant do after burning this letter?
Well, Harper had left the scene, so I decided to follow them, where I was eventually led into the bottling area.
We can stop screen sharing Exhibit 24. What did Martini do in the bottling area?
I saw Harper walk out of the room with the bottle of Cara that I saw before, but I wasn't able to follow Harper out since I was preoccupied with another huge discovery.
What did you see?
I saw an open, almost empty canister of what looked exactly like bug-off pesticide sitting right next to where they bottle all the wine. I poured the rest of the canister contents into an empty container so that I could get it analyzed.
Your Honor, permission to screen share what has been previously admitted Exhibit 11 at this time.
You may.
Do you recognize this exhibit?
Yes.
And can you read the bottom line for me of what these lab results show?
Yes. Sorry. It says that
Under additional notes.
by client.
Yes.
This showed that a bottle of bug-off pesticide found in Paris's shed. Paris repeatedly, the sample collected from the bottle of, the sample collected was bug-off pesticide.
Can you read the first sentence under additional notes by analyst?
Yes. The sample was consistent with commercial pesticide in both appearance and odor.
Are you aware of what Genesis Petrio died from?
Pesticide poisoning.
No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
All right. Defense.
Cross, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me all right, Miss Green, Miss Paris?
Yes, I can.
Now, you're familiar with an individual named Landon Green, right?
Yes.
Landon Green came to you with a position offer, right?
Correct.
In fact, the only way you were going to get that position.
Your Honor, relevance.
Response.
Yes, Your Honor. This is going specifically to the credibility and the bias of this particular witness.
Your
Respond.
Honor.
Go ahead.
We have not received any character evidence forms for Lonnie Paris on truthfulness or untruthfulness. And as far as her work history goes, I don't see how either of that will lead to bias.
Response, Your Honor?
Go ahead.
Your Honor, we don't have to fill out character evidence forms for evidence under Rule 607. It's only under Rule 603 and 604. But further, Your Honor, this is going to her credibility to show that she would either disproportionate things or that she would be elaborating or exaggerating on things that might not have happened the way she wants us to believe.
I tend to agree. I'm going to overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor. So you decided to keep digging, right?
Sure.
And after you kept digging, you actually found out about wine sales from Peony Estates.
Yes.
You found about Kara's wine sales as well.
Kara had not been, the Kara wine was not released.
That's right. The Kara wine wasn't released, and you only knew of one person who had drank that wine, right?
I can't confirm that, but yes.
So the only person you know of that drank it had also died, right?
I guess that's correct.
Miss Paris, you assumed that that wine killed Genesis Petrillo.
I wouldn't say that.
You're saying that Genesis Petrillo didn't buy the Kara wine?
Genesis Petrillo didn't what?
Did not die by the Kara wine, sorry.
Genesis Petrillo died of pesticide poisoning, but I can't comment on anything about the wine.
Miss Paris, you remember writing an affidavit prior to his trial, right?
Yes.
You'd recognize a copy of the affidavit if it were shown to you today.
Yes.
Your Honor, permission from Ms. Villarreal to post the witness's affidavit on screen.
Go ahead.
Ms. Villarreal, this is your affidavit, right?
No, I'm Miss Paris.
Miss Paris, apologies.
Honor, I asked that we be able to see the date on that affidavit as well as the top.
All right, go ahead. Just scroll up a little bit. Is that good? Okay. You may continue.
Ms. Paris, this is a fair and accurate copy of your affidavit, right?
Yes.
No changes or alterations have been made to it in any way to your knowledge?
No, not of my knowledge.
And you know you had up until today before trial to modify your affidavit in order to properly reflect the truth?
Yes, I did.
Ms. Paris, if you could read along silently while I read aloud. So Kara was 1 for 1 in terms of fatalities. Did I read that right?
Yes.
You can take the affidavit down, Ms. Villarreal. Now, again, you had no evidence showing that Genesis Petrillo died by Kara wine.
No.
Now, I want to talk a little bit more about evidence. Now, you've been to Peony Estates several times, right?
Correct.
You've been on numerous tours.
Yes.
But never once have you been an employee.
No, I've not.
You've snuck into employee-only areas multiple times, right?
Yes.
On direct examination, even.
As to substantially more prejudicial than probative, by bringing this up, it's then implying that all of her testimony, due to the fact that she was not there under an employee status, that it is then tarnished by bias or untruthfulness.
Response, Your Honor?
Go ahead.
Your Honor, again, this all goes back to the credibility of the witness. It also goes to the fact that this evidence was all obtained illegally, because we're actually going to hear later on today that Lonnie Paris was actually trespassing on this property at the time.
Overruled.
May I proceed, Your Honor? Now, Ms. Paris, you have never been an employee at the time, right?
Correct.
But you've snuck into employee-only areas multiple times.
Yes.
On direct examination, you even said you had to picklock a door.
That was legal. The lockpick that I had was legal in the state of Midlands.
But that's a yes to my question that you lockpicked a door.
Legally, correct.
To get into an area you are not allowed to be in.
But that was put in place by Peony Estates, not the law.
So you were actually told that if you were ever caught on Peony Estates again, you would be found for trespassing, right?
Austin said that Austin would take me to Harper, so.
And that the law enforcement would be called, wouldn't they?
Sure, this is just a threat.
And that they'd take legal action against you too, wouldn't they?
Sure, nothing I haven't heard of before.
You were trespassing on the night you obtained that note, isn't that right?
I was there at Peony Estates.
Asked and answered. I believe that we have already established the trespassing point.
Response, Your Honor?
No need. Overruled, but let's move on.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Ms. Paris, I want to make it clear for the jury, you don't know who HM is on that note, do you?
I believe those initials belong to Harper Martini, as I saw Harper Martini standing by the note.
Okay, but yes or no, you don't know for certain that HM stands for Harper Martini.
I recognize the handwriting and I saw Harper standing by the note, but no, not for sure.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right. Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Ms. Paris, you're excused. Plaintiff, call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Angel Rodriguez.
All right.
Good evening, Ms. Rodriguez. Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, yes, my name is Angel Rodriguez.
And why are you here today?
I volunteered today to talk about what I saw at Casey and Genesis' wedding rehearsal.
How do you know Genesis and Casey?
So the three of us met 4 years ago at Chuggy's Sports Bar. I remember this because it was the night of the annual Kappa Kappa Rafa raffle. I graduated in 2010, but don't mistake, I'm still very much involved and I love my little sisters. Anyway, me and Casey and Genesis all ended up becoming really good friends.
And Ms. Rodriguez, do you know the defendant, Harper Martini?
Yes, in 2019, Harper started getting involved with a lot of the wedding planning, which really cramped my style because I've thrown hundreds of pledge parties. How different could a wedding be? But Harper and I ended up around each other a lot.
I want to talk about Genesis and Harper's relationship for a little bit. What did their interactions look like when they were together?
Well, things were always tense. And to be honest, sometimes I just wanted to be invisible when Genesis were in a room together. And I love being the center of attention. I was president of the Kappa Kappa Rafa sorority, so, you know.
And what do you mean by that, Ms. Rodriguez?
Whenever I saw them together, Harper would just insult Genesis over and over and call him names, yelling. It seemed like they were constantly arguing, and I don't really like confrontation, so it made me super uncomfortable. It really looked like a Kappa Kappa Rafa sister cat fight. So trashy.
Ms. Rodriguez, I want to move ahead to the day of the wedding rehearsal. Did things seem better between Harper and Genesis on that day?
No, they were arguing even more, and Harper said some really mean things.
What do you remember the defendant saying?
So Harper said that Genesis should just leave and save his family the headache. Otherwise, I will make you disappear. Can you believe the audacity?
And how did Genesis react to hearing that?
He didn't say anything at all then. I think we're all a little shocked by what Harper said. Later on, Genesis confronted the defendant about her comments.
And what happened when Genesis confronted the defendant?
So Harper grabbed Genesis' arm and dragged him into the hallway, and I don't know what they talked about. But when Genesis came back, he just had no expression at all, like completely blank.
And did Genesis say anything?
All he said was to keep away from Harper. I think she's going to kill me. I thought it was a joke at first, but then Genesis didn't laugh or smile, and then he just walked away.
Miss Rodriguez, did you ever see Harper again that day before the dinner?
Yeah, about an hour before the dinner, I saw her walking towards the kitchen.
And what was the defendant doing?
Harper was holding a can of bug killer. I'm not sure the brand, but I saw the word pesticide on it. I asked what she was doing with it.
And how did the defendant respond?
Harper said it's for Genesis because Genesis is such a pest, and walked away.
Let's move ahead to the rehearsal dinner. Do you remember around 10 p.m. what was happening then?
It started off with toast to the couple. We ate dinner. And then Harper gave Genesis a gift. I really had been to better dinners at the Kappa Kappa Rafa house.
You mentioned the defendant gave Genesis a gift. What was that?
So Harper brought out a ton of different wine bottles as party favors for everyone there. But Genesis got a specifically different wine from everyone else.
And who all drank from that bottle of wine?
I was with Genesis the whole entire night. And the only person who drank from the wine was Genesis. At one point, Genesis gave me a sip to try it, but it tasted weird, and I don't really like wine, so I spit it out. I actually prefer Truly's, you know. They help me keep my figure.
And do you remember what the label on that wine said?
It said Cara 2019 or 2019 Cara.
And do you remember how much of that wine did Genesis drink?
Over the next hour or so, he drank a couple more glasses of the Cara wine. I didn't see him drink anything else the entire night.
And as the night went on, what happened to Genesis?
So around midnight, Genesis passed out, and I looked over at him, and he was slumped over in his chair, and he looked like one of my wasted sorority sisters. So I just decided to call it off and take him to his room. And I really should have known something was wrong. But in the moment, I would just hope that he would just sleep it off, just like the rest of us Kappa Kappa Rafas. So we just took him up to his room.
And what happened when you got Genesis to his room?
He started throwing up over and over, and I tried to give him water, but he didn't even drink it, and he was pale and sweating, and I was really starting to get scared. And so after a few minutes, he passed out, and I called 911, and I went with the EMTs to the hospital.
And what happened at the hospital?
I waited there all night, and in the morning, they told me Genesis was in a coma. I just couldn't believe it. It was just so surreal.
Did you go back to the winery?
Yes, I got an Uber. I had to tell Casey. I just couldn't do it over the phone.
And who did you see first when you got back?
The first person I saw as soon as I walked through the doors was Harper.
And what did Harper Martini say?
Before I even said anything, Harper literally said,
"That's
Genesis
time, Your
got
Honor."
poisoned."
I'll let the witness finish her answer.
Harper literally said, Genesis got poisoned? Oh no, we'll have to cancel the wedding.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Defense?
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
You were good friends with Genesis Petrillo and Casey Soto, right?
Yes.
And you were part of their wedding party.
Yes.
You noticed that tension was high between Miss Martini and Mr. Petrillo,
Yes.
but you never thought Miss Martini hated Mr. Petrillo, correct?
I'm not sure that I can answer that.
During the wedding rehearsal, you saw Miss Martini give a toast.
Yes.
And in Miss Martini's second toast, you would agree with me in saying Miss Martini was trying to make amends with Mr. Petrillo, correct?
Yeah, I think so.
During that second toast, Miss Martini gave Mr. Petrillo a bottle of Cara as a gift, right?
Yes.
And Cara was a nice bottle of wine.
Well, I don't know much about wine.
Throughout the night of the wedding rehearsal, it is fair to say that Mr. Petrillo drank a couple of glasses of Cara, correct?
Yes.
And you actually accepted a glass of Cara wine from Mr. Petrillo, right?
Only a sip, and I spit it out.
In fact, you were the only other person to accept a glass of Cara, correct?
I didn't accept it, and it wasn't a glass. I already told you I only drank Trulies, so
You did take a sip of the wine, is that right?
just a sip.
And you never experienced any type of poisoning or illness, correct?
No, but I didn't have it.
And later that night, around 10:45 p.m., you did notice that Mr. Petrillo was acting strange.
Yeah.
You even recognized that Mr. Petrillo had never acted this strange before.
Yeah, it was pretty scary.
And he even ended up throwing up, right?
Yeah, as most of us do when we drink too much.
You also saw that Mr. Petrillo was not able to keep down any liquids without throwing them back up, correct?
Yes.
And he also started sweating excessively.
I didn't know about the sweating, but sure.
And so around 12:42 a.m., you decided to call 911.
Yeah, like a good friend would do.
Yes, and you waited an entire 2 hours to call for help. Is that correct?
Well, I thought that he had alcohol poisoning, but obviously it wasn't.
Directing you back to my question, you waited an entire 2 hours to call for help, correct?
Yes.
And within those 2 hours, you did not contact Mr. Soto, correct?
No, he had went to bed.
You waited until Mr. Petrillo slipped into a coma to contact Mr. Soto.
I did not contact him immediately. I got into an Uber.
Yes, you waited until Mr. Petrillo slipped into a coma, correct?
Sure.
Ms. Rodriguez, you did not ever see Miss Martini put pesticides in the bottle of wine, correct?
No, I think that's beyond my scope of knowledge.
You actually never even saw pesticides anywhere near the wine itself, is that correct?
I'm not exactly sure.
Did you or did you not see pesticides near the wine itself?
It was in the bottling area, so in wine in general, yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
And Your Honor, at this time, we ask that Ms. Rodriguez be able to leave the stand.
Right. Ms. Rodriguez, you're excused. Anything further from the plaintiff?
With that, Your Honor, the plaintiff rests our case in chief. We ask if there's time that we take maybe a 5-minute recess.
Let's do a 4-minute recess, reconvene at 8:25 Central.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, are both teams back? And are my co-judges also present?
I'm present.
Luke, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay. Is the defense ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Defense, call your first witness.
At this time, the defense calls Harper Martini. Please introduce yourself to the court.
Sorry, I was muted. Hi, my name's Harper Martini.
Can you tell us what you do for a living?
I grew up in Napa Valley, California, so I was basically raised on my family's vineyard. So now I own a winery here called Peony Estates after I moved to Midlands in the 80s.
Your Honor, permission to share Exhibit 4 on the screen, noting that it has been pre-admitted under Stipulation 3.
Go ahead.
Can you explain the layout of Peony Estates?
Yeah, so right here, you can kind of see my winery. Up in the top right corner is kind of where everything happens. There's the kitchen and the tasting room, and that's where we hold all our big events. And then I have bed and breakfast cabins up in the top left corner. And then we grow all of our grapes on the vineyards down below. So everything's pretty close together. It's all pretty much within walking distance.
Objection, Your Honor, as to point of order on this evidence, I think it's dated 9/8, which is not the updated case.
Defense, is this true?
Your Honor, this is the exhibit that the defense has on file as far as it being Exhibit 4 from the American Mock Trial Association website.
And the updated case is 9/25.
This is actually the one that pulls up on the website.
Okay. Well, I'm sure none of it has been
There have been no changes made, Your Honor.
All right. If both parties agree, then we'll continue with this version of the exhibit.
Ms. Martini, can you tell us a little bit more about your personal life?
Yeah, there's really not a lot to tell. Oh, sorry. There's really not a lot to tell. My life absolutely revolves around Casey, who's my only kid. I'm a single mom, so Casey's always come first. He's my whole world.
And how would you describe your relationship with Mr. Soto?
Well, I've always been extremely close with Casey, and I prioritized his happiness and well-being. We were two peas in a pod because we were all we had. The only time we ever had issues was throughout Casey's relationship with Genesis.
Ms. Martini, do you know why you're here?
Yeah, there's a claim that I poisoned Genesis. I didn't have the best relationship with Genesis, but I would never intentionally poison someone. Genesis made Casey happy, and all I ever wanted was for Casey to be happy.
You just said that you and Ms. Petrillo did not have the best relationship. What can you tell us about that?
Well, it was rocky from the start. The first thing Genesis ever said to me was an insult about my wine. And that's not even the end of it. Genesis was always fighting and arguing with me. I tried to be civil with him for Casey's sake and even tried to make amends a few times.
And how did you handle the issue between you two?
Well, like I said, I tried to make amends. I tried to talk to Genesis a few times at Casey's request. I even set up a lunch for the two of us to talk, but Genesis just kept pushing it off. I just wanted to have a good relationship with Genesis before the wedding.
And how did you feel about Mr. Petrillo and Mr. Soto getting married?
I really didn't want them to get married because I thought Genesis was a bad influence on Casey, but I also wanted Casey to be happy, so I worked really hard to make the wedding absolutely perfect. I offered to have the wedding at my winery and pay for the whole thing and work with a wedding planner and a caterer so that Casey and Genesis didn't have to worry about any of it.
So how are you involved in planning the wedding?
Well, like I said, I hired the best wedding planner, Blair Osborne, as well as a catering service for the rehearsal dinner and the reception. I had worked with both of them in the past during events held at my winery, so I completely trusted them to create the perfect wedding for Casey.
Now, I would like to talk to you about the rehearsal dinner. What day was the rehearsal dinner?
June 7th, 2019.
And how did the rehearsal dinner start off?
Well, when I arrived, everything was really chaotic. I had to go take care of something unexpected, so I handed off the wedding party gifts to the chef, Sam Arnold, to have him present them during the toasts.
And what did you have to take care of?
Well, I found out that someone had seen a cockroach in the kitchen, so I went to go spray it to avoid any surprises during dinner. This isn't really that uncommon because the winery is near a swamp, so we have to spray pesticide pretty often to comply with the health codes.
So, how did the rest of the dinner go?
Everything after that was smooth and the dinner was perfect. Everyone loved the food, and the toasts by the wedding party were really sweet, even the one Genesis gave. I gave a toast as well to Genesis in final attempts to establish a better relationship with him.
And what happened during that toast?
I actually can't remember anything I said, but during my toast, I had Sam present Genesis with a bottle of wine from me.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that bottle of wine?
Of course. It was the very first bottle of a small batch of wine that my winery produces every year. It was done aging in the cellar about a month before the wedding, and after tasting it, I decided it would be the perfect gift for Genesis.
And why did you feel that it would be the perfect gift for Mr. Petrillo?
It was really similar to something that Genesis had loved when we were doing a wine tasting for the wedding a few months back. Casey hadn't even named it Cara, which I thought was kind of cute. I thought the wine could be like extending an olive branch to Genesis.
And what did you do after Mr. Petrillo received the bottle of Cara?
I finished up my toasts and I was relieved because Casey seemed so happy that I was making amends with Genesis. I stayed at the dinner for a little longer and everything seemed to be going well, so I left around 10:30.
And what happened that next morning?
Well, I actually went back to the winery around 2:30 in the morning because I got a call that someone had been taken to the hospital. I immediately rushed back and found Genesis's room was empty besides the empty bottle of Cara wine on the floor.
Did you do anything with the bottle after you found it?
I was so devastated that the wedding might be ruined. I ripped the label off and threw the bottle in the trash because there was no reason to keep the empty bottle laying around. After that, I just went back home until it was time to get ready and prayed everything would be okay.
And what happened when you went back a second time?
While we were getting Casey ready, we found out that Genesis had slipped into a coma and died. Casey was obviously devastated and he rushed back to the hospital with Angel. The wedding was obviously canceled, so Blair and I spent the rest of the morning sending away guests.
Miss Martini, I have to ask, did you add poison to the wine bottle you gave Mr. Petrillo?
Of course not. Genesis and I may not have had the best relationship, but it wasn't to the point of killing him. I'd made amends with Genesis, and Casey was so excited to start their life together. I hate seeing Casey sad because he's the most important thing in my life, and I would never poison the love of his life.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Plaintiff?
You're the owner of Peony Estates Winery, correct?
Yes, I am.
And this business has been one of the most central things to your entire life, correct?
Yes, running a business is really time consuming.
And the only thing that mattered to you more would be your child, Casey, correct?
Yes, he was the only thing I had.
Your wish was for Casey to take over Peony Estates Winery one day, is that correct?
Yes, I wanted it to be a family business like I had when I was living in California.
But the only problem with that was Casey dating Genesis Petrillo, right?
Yes.
And you two got off on a bad foot, right?
Yeah, we did.
You felt like Genesis was a threat to your business, correct?
To my business and my son, yes.
Genesis frequently made insulting comments about Peony Estates, right?
Yes, specifically about the wine.
You thought that if Genesis stuck around, there was no way Casey would think highly enough of your business or you to take it over, correct?
Yeah, that's right, because Casey really took what Genesis said to heart.
You thought that your relationship with Casey and your business would be better off if Genesis were somehow out of the picture, correct?
I did, yes.
You actually received a voicemail from Genesis in May, less than a month before the wedding, right?
I did, yes.
Matters between the two of you were much worse at this point, correct?
I would say so, yeah, but tensions were really high because we were planning the wedding.
Your Honor, permission to share Exhibit 8, which has been previously admitted.
Go ahead.
Genesis told you that it's time for you to know that after the wedding, they were moving to France, correct?
Yes.
And Casey hadn't told you this, correct?
No, he hadn't.
In fact, Genesis said Casey didn't want you to know, right?
Yes, which hurt me a little bit.
And Genesis said that you would never see them again, right?
Yeah, that also hurt.
And in response, you told Genesis that there was nothing you wouldn't do to protect your only child. Is that correct?
Yes, I wanted Casey to be in my life. He's my only family.
You were really worried that with Genesis around, your relationship with Casey would not have much time left, right?
Yes, like I said, Casey was my only family and I wanted him around.
And I want to talk to you about the day of the accident, June 7th. Genesis arrived late, correct?
Yes.
And you both had been arguing, right?
That day specifically?
Yes.
A little bit, yeah.
Genesis had even confronted you before the dinner, right?
Yes.
And Genesis gave you back a letter that you had written to him, correct?
Yes, he threw it at me.
You wrote that if he left Casey, the enclosed $300,000 would be theirs, right?
Yeah, it was a last-ditch effort to get Genesis out of our lives.
And you wrote that otherwise you'd take him out of the picture the hard way, correct?
Yes.
You then attempted to destroy this letter, correct?
Yes, I threw it in the furnace.
And even still, the rehearsal went on, right?
Yes, it did.
And the event was catered, correct?
Yes, by Sam Arnold.
And you provided each guest with a bottle of your Horizon wine, right?
Yes, the wedding party.
But you provided Genesis with a different wine, right?
Yes, but Genesis was the groom, so
And he was the only one to receive anything different, correct?
like I said, he was the groom. I thought he deserved something a little bit better than the rest of them.
But you didn't give anything to Casey, correct?
Well, Casey was my son. He was around me all the time. I'd already given him what I needed to.
You had a bottle of Cara wine special just for Genesis. That is correct?
Yes.
And it was that night that you personally gifted this wine, right?
Yes.
Now I want to talk to you later about that morning. Austin Lewis called you around 2:30 a.m. Is that correct?
Yes.
Austin told you that they heard someone was rushed to the hospital, but they didn't know who it was, right?
Yes, correct.
However, you went straight to Genesis's room that night, correct?
I did, but only because Genesis had gone to the hospital before.
And it was there that you found an empty bottle of Cara on the floor, correct?
Yes.
The same bottle that you previously gifted Genesis, right?
Yes, it was the only one that we had.
Then decided to throw the bottle away, correct?
Yeah, there's no reason to leave an empty bottle on the
But
floor.
not before ripping off the label. Is that right?
That's right, but I was mad.
You are aware that the doctors believe that Genesis's death is caused by pesticide poisoning, is that correct?
I am aware of that, yes.
And you're aware that this pesticide is an isofenfos organophosphate?
I'm not sure if I know the exact chemical compounds, but yeah.
Well, you're aware that you have access to this particular pesticide, correct?
Yes, we only use one on the estates.
In fact, you frequently use this one pesticide on the estate, correct?
Yes, it's the best for our needs.
And you were previously aware that someone drinking poisoned wine wouldn't smell it, right?
Yes, somebody had accidentally taken a sip.
That they wouldn't see it, correct?
Yes.
And you're aware that the effects of this pesticide being mixed into wine could be fatal, right?
Yes, nobody had ever died from it
Consuming
before,
this
but I was aware.
pesticide could lead to death, correct?
Again, I had never seen it happen before, but I was aware.
And you were relieved, happy in fact, that Genesis was no longer in your life. Is that correct?
I wasn't happy that he died, but I was glad he was out of our lives.
So that's a yes to my question. You were relieved, happy in fact, that Genesis was no longer in your life, correct?
No longer in our lives, but not dead. Correct.
No further questions at this time.
Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. May the witness be excused?
All right. Defense, call your next witness.
Defense calls Mr. Ott.
Oh, sorry. Who is speaking?
My apologies, Your Honor.
All right.
Defense calls Mr. Austin Lewis to the stand. Can you hear me, Mr. Lewis?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Sir, good evening. Please introduce yourself to the jury.
My name is Austin Lewis. I'm a Rapid River Valley native, born and raised.
And Mr. Lewis, what do you do for a living?
I'm currently the head of winemaker at Peony Estates. I've been in the winemaking business practically my entire life.
And as head winemaker, what are some of your responsibilities at Peony Estates?
I'm pretty much in complete charge of the winemaking operations at Peony. I oversee the growing, harvesting, fermentation, aging, and bottling of all of our wines. I'm also responsible for taking care of the equipment, fields, and any pest control that is necessary, including the spraying of pesticide.
Now, you mentioned the spraying of pesticides. What do you mean by that? Are they dangerous?
Yes, they can be. At Peony, we have to use a lot of pesticides because of the vineyard's location near a swamp and the amount of pests that we get because of it.
Mr. Lewis, I gotta ask you, have you ever done anything about the concerns you had?
Yes, I did have concerns because I said earlier, our vineyard is located very close to the Solove Swamp, and also our vineyard is located on a slope. So the sizes of our grapes depend on where the grapes are grown on the slope of the vineyard. Smaller grapes tend to be grown near the top of the vineyard, and as you get lower along the slope, the bigger the size of the grape is due to the excess of water. I was pretty concerned actually about spraying chemicals, pesticides on our vines because I thought that the bottom grapes would be getting.
Objection, Your Honor. I'm objecting to narrative.
Response, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Mr. Lewis is actually just about to finish his answer.
All right. Let's make sure that we keep our answers nice and concise. But for now, I'll overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Lewis, how did they affect the grapes?
Sorry. So the size of the grapes is dependent on where they're grown on the slope. And as I was saying earlier, the grapes grown near the bottom tend to be larger. So I was concerned that any pesticide sprayed would flow down the slope and contaminate the grapes with unsafe levels of pesticides.
Mr. Lewis, what did you do about these concerns?
First, everywhere that I thought might have unsafe levels of contamination, I would rope off. Secondly, at the end of every harvest, I would throw out those grapes from the roped off areas. I've personally supervised this every single year that I've been there, except for 2018.
I want to talk about 2018 in just a moment, Mr. Lewis, but first I want the jury to get an understanding of the layout. Would you recognize a map of Peony Estates if it were shown to you?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, permission for Ms. Villarreal to post Exhibit 4 on screen, noting it's been admitted into evidence.
Go ahead.
Mr. Lewis, what is this on screen?
This is a map of Peony Estates.
Is it a fair and accurate copy of the map?
Yes, it is.
And can you show the members of the jury where on the map you took those precautions you mentioned?
Yes, sir. So as you notice, the green is our vineyards at Peony Estates. And as you see, the elevation does go down as it goes towards the swamp, as I said earlier, because it's on a slope. So I would rope off the areas in the panhandle near the storage shed and the wine cave, as well as that lower part of the green near the solo swamp. There'd be areas where I'd rope off.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Ms. Villarreal, you can take that down now. Based on your experience, what happened to those grapes from the 2018 harvest?
In 2018, I had a family emergency, which required me to leave Rapid River Valley. So I left clear instructions that the grapes from those areas should be thrown out. No one called me with any questions or anything, so I just assumed that my instructions were taken care of.
Mr. Lewis, if any grapes were contaminated, how could you distinguish those grapes from clean grapes?
There's no way to tell, not for the grapes or for the wine either.
Were any grapes from the 2018 harvest used in the winemaking process?
Yes, all of the harvest would have been used except the grapes which I roped off.
Mr. Lewis, is it possible that some wine from 2018 winemaking could have been contaminated?
I can't say for sure what happened during the 2018 harvest. I wouldn't think so, but it is possible that some of our wines may have been contaminated.
Despite not knowing if your wine was contaminated, did Peony Estates continue to use chemical pesticides?
Yes, we did. Using chemical pesticides is a lot cheaper than using organic solutions, and chemical pesticides also work a lot better for treating pest infestations. I notified our employees that we would be spraying chemical pesticides inside the bottling center and our production facilities in one of my monthly memos.
Would you recognize this monthly memo if it were shown to you today?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Villarreal, could you put, Your Honor, permission for Ms. Villarreal to put Exhibit 12 on screen?
You may.
Mr. Lewis, what's on screen right now?
This is my July memo from 2018.
Is it a fair and accurate copy?
Yes, it is, sir.
Have any changes or alterations been made to it to your knowledge?
No, sir, it has not.
Your Honor, the defense offers Exhibit 12.
Any objections?
The plaintiff does object to hearsay within hearsay in these statements and in this exhibit.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor. Before I respond, though, could opposing counsel explain their objection?
Yes, Your Honor. So to start out, all of these statements that are made by to all of the PNE Estates employees, this whole document is made out of court and so therefore is hearsay. And I believe that they are going to be using this to prove the truth of the matter asserted in this memo. And then within hearsay, the statements that are mentioned inside of this memo are furthermore hearsay inside of this already document that was made outside of court.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Here's what we'll do. I'll overrule the hearsay within hearsay, but as far as the statements of this exhibit, I would like to hear your response to the hearsay.
Yes, Your Honor. This is all specifically going to exception 803.6, which is all that this is a certified business record.
Okay. Plaintiff, your response?
In response to the 803.6 objection, I believe that more foundation may need to be laid in order to say that this is a regularly conducted business record, if I believe is that the rule. I'm pulling up the rules of evidence.
Yes, ma'am.
I would ask that the defense counsel lays that foundation that this is regularly conducted memo and not just a one-time, just more specific statements that are being once again brought into court that were made outside of court.
If I may respond to that, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Mr. Lewis actually already stated in his answer that these were regularly conducted monthly memos. This is just one of the ones that we're taking and showing to the jury.
Final response?
Final response, Your Honor. I do believe that this statement I don't believe that it was falling under this exception, as this appears to be a more of a special case of a memo and not always we don't have the necessarily, there hasn't been any testimony that this is necessarily regularly conducted, that these types of memos are put out. And it appears that the content of this is also coming into question, that it's more of a specific type of scenario. So therefore, I still believe that it is hearsay.
Plaintiff, are you trying to assert that this was not regularly conducted? Is that what you're trying to say? That this is not a regularly conducted activity?
Yes, Your Honor.
In that case, would you like to perform a voir dire in order to establish that?
No, Your Honor. If the defense counsel would just like to set that foundation a little more clearly, I'd be perfectly reasonable with that.
I believe the defense counsel has established that it was regular in that it was monthly. But if you believe it wasn't, and you have some evidence to show that it's not, then you may perform a voir dire. Otherwise, I'm going to admit the evidence.
Your Honor, I will relodge my objection at a later time if I see fit, but I see no issues with going forward with this as a regularly conducted activity.
All right. In that case, this exhibit is admitted.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Lewis, could you summarize to the jury what this particular memo says?
Yes, sir. I notified our employees that we would begin using chemical pesticides on the entirety of PNE Estates, including inside the bottling areas and production facilities.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Ms. Villarreal, you can take that down now. Mr. Lewis, with chemical pesticides being inside the bottling area, were there any health issues for PNE Estates?
We did get cited 3 different times for health code violations, but if there were any health issues, we weren't aware of them.
Now, I want to take a moment and shift over to your relationship with Ms. Harper Martini. How is that like?
We've always had a good relationship since the day we met. Harper's main and only priorities, it seemed to be the winery and her son, Casey. A lot of our conversations, especially as it got towards closer to the wedding, tended to end with discussion about Casey's fiance, Genesis.
Now, you said a lot of your conversations end with Genesis. What did you mean by that?
Harper seemed very preoccupied with wedding. I also know that Harper did not like Genesis very much. They had a lot of arguments, and it was clear that Harper would be happiest if Casey and Genesis did not get married. But like I said, Casey was her main priority, and I know that she would have done anything to make her happy. Excuse me.
Mr. Lewis, based on all of your experiences at the winery and with Harper Martini, would Miss Harper Martini ever do anything to impede the wedding?
No, Harper loved Casey completely and wouldn't have done anything to ruin his wedding day.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor. Hi, Mr. Lewis. Let's just start out. Pesticide was kept on property at Peony Estates, isn't that right?
Yes, that is correct.
And it was the Bug Off brand, correct?
Yes, that is the only chemical pesticide that we use at Peony Estates.
And you previously mentioned Harper Martini knew how to use this pesticide, right?
Well, as the owner of Peony Estates, she would have the knowledge, but I was mostly in charge of that. She kind of kept to the business side of things.
But let me redirect you back to my question. Harper Martini, as the owner of Peony Estates, she knew how to use this pesticide, correct?
Yes, she would have known.
And Martini knew that it was very dangerous, correct?
Yes, she did.
In fact, Harper Martini has firsthand experience with pesticide poisoning. Isn't that right, Mr. Lewis?
Yes, she did. We did have an unfortunate accident occur.
And that was one of the employees at Peony Estates had been poisoned by pesticide. Isn't that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And after this happened, Harper described to you that you can't tell wine is poison just from looking at it. Isn't that right?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, so Harper described to you that you are not able to tell that wine is poisoned just from looking at that wine.
Yes, that's correct.
She also described to you that you can't tell wine is poisoned just from smelling it, correct?
Correct.
All right, let's move on a little bit. You've been working for Harper Martini for about 5 years, isn't that right?
Yes.
And you have 10% stake in Peony Estates, right?
Yes, that's correct. I was actually really excited when she offered me the position at Peony Estates.
Awesome. But if Harper Martini loses this case, you'll be out of a job, isn't that right?
Yeah, yes, ma'am, that's correct. But I was actually looking at back at working with Mr. Francazio.
But let me redirect. That's a yes to my question, correct?
Would I be out of a job? Yes, ma'am.
And in fact, losing Peony Estates is the last thing that you want to happen. Isn't that right?
Yes, that's correct.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. I ask that Mr. Austin Lewis be allowed to step down.
All right, Mr. Lewis, you're excused. Defense, call your next witness. You're muted.
My apologies, Your Honor. We would like the defense now calls Dr. Cannon to the stand.
Okay.
Please introduce yourself to the court.
Hello, my name is Dr. Rebecca Cannon.
And what do you do for a living?
Well, these days I work for a consulting firm that's based out of Beverly Hills, California. But before that, I was the chief toxicologist at Massachusetts General before taking a teaching position at Midlands Med.
And what does your current position entail?
Well, as a consultant, I get to take all the experience that I gained on the field and then go back and review the expert reports of other doctors for accuracy. It's basically my dream job.
What kind of education do you have to hold such a position?
Well, I got my bachelor's of science from the Ohio State University before going on to medical school at Harvard, where I specialized in toxicology.
Have you ever been published in your field?
Yes, over 50 times actually. I really love being the first to publish on a topic, so whenever there's something being discovered, I'm always the first to write on it. I usually write specifically about toxicology and pharmacology.
What is the difference between pharmacology and toxicology?
I actually get this question a lot, but essentially, pharmacology is the study of chemicals working for our bodies, and toxicology is the study of chemicals working against it.
Why are you here today?
I was hired by the defense in today's case to review the findings of a Dr. Jimin Kwan. He was the attending physician in the ER the night that Genesis Petrillo was hospitalized. I had some questions about the conclusions that Dr. Kwan presented regarding the cause of death.
What kind of materials did you use to draw your own conclusions?
I was given the expert report of Dr. Jimin Kwan, along with the affidavit of Angel Rodriguez and any relevant exhibits.
Were these materials sufficient to come to your conclusions?
Yes, these are very standard for cases like this.
And what kind of methods did you apply to today's case?
I use the gold standard in the field of consulting, the process of comparative analysis. Essentially, I look over Dr. Kwan's report and present my own findings based on the information that I've been given.
Was this method reliable?
Yes, I do this all the time in my line of work.
Now, Dr. Keenan, you mentioned that Dr. Kwan's report raised some questions for you. Would you mind elaborating on that?
Yeah, based on what I reviewed in Dr. Kwan's report and the accompanying materials, I believe that Dr. Kwan may have been hasty in diagnosing Genesis with pesticide poisoning.
What do you mean by hasty?
Well, Dr. Kwan initially admitted Genesis to the hospital for alcohol poisoning, something that he ruled out due to some of Genesis's symptoms being somewhat unusual for that diagnosis. Him proceeding to act on that hunch with no test confirmation was highly unusual.
Why would it be unusual for him to act on his hunch?
Well, in the medical field, mistakes can be costly, even deadly. To act on suspicion without knowing what's actually going on wastes precious time that Genesis Petrillo did not have.
How did Dr. Kwan diagnose Mr. Petrillo?
Well, Dr. Kwan diagnosed Genesis with organophosphate poisoning and administered the antidote in line with that diagnosis.
Did the antidote work?
No, it did not.
So was Mr. Petrillo exposed to pesticides?
Yes, but that's a little complicated. So there's actually not a simple blood test to confirm that someone is suffering from pesticide poisoning. The only test that we can administer to check for that diagnosis is to test for low levels of acetylcholinesterase to see if organophosphates could be the cause of injury. This is the test that Dr. Kwan ran on Petrillo.
Now, Dr. Cannon, would you recognize Exhibit 5 if I showed it to you in court today?
I would.
Your Honor, permission for my fellow council member to show Exhibit 5 on the screen, noting that it has been pre-admitted into evidence.
Me.
Ms. Villarreal, if you don't mind. Now, Dr. Cannon, what are we looking at here?
This is Genesis's blood test result from the early morning of June 8th. Now, doctors look to a low level of acetylcholinesterase to mean that if there's smoke, there's fire kind of deal. But acetylcholinesterase can actually be lowered by a number of things.
Such as what?
Liver disease, a number of other non-lethal organophosphates. You can get exposed to pesticides by taking a bite of an apple from the grocery store. It happens.
Thank you, Ms. Villarreal. We can take down the exhibit now. Dr. Cannon, were there any other tests run on Mr. Petrillo?
Well, his BAC was tested at 3 a.m. and reflected 0.16, which would ordinarily not be fatal. It is worth noting, though, that his blood was tested several hours after he stopped drinking.
Why is this notable?
This is important because Genesis's body was likely in an elimination phase at this point.
What do you mean by elimination phase?
Well, when you drink alcohol, your body begins to absorb it through the stomach and intestine into your bloodstream. Now, that process takes about 30 minutes, give or take. Then your kidneys and your liver begin to process out that ethanol, putting you in elimination phase, a downward slope.
Why is that important?
Well, from what we know, Genesis stopped drinking completely at 12:42 a.m. Now, even if she'd taken a shot right before they left for the emergency room, which honestly is unlikely based on the state that she was in at that point, her body still would have been eliminating that alcohol by the time they got to the hospital.
What does that mean?
Well, it means that Petrio's BAC would have likely been much higher earlier in the night, possibly putting him in the fatal BAC range.
If his BAC was in that fatal range, what would he have experienced?
Well, as in most alcohol poisoning cases, people with a super high BAC are at risk of loss of motor function, loss of consciousness, and eventually respiratory failure.
Now, Dr. Kwan, my apologies, Dr. Cannon, what was the primary cause of death in this case?
Well, Dr. Kwan noted Petrio's primary cause of death to be respiratory failure.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Good evening, Dr. Cannon.
Good evening.
So I want to make it clear, Dr. Cannon, you believe that the most likely cause of Genesis Petrio's death was because of pesticide poisoning.
Yes, it's more likely than the alternatives, but it is worth noting that there is more than one possibility here.
Dr. Cannon, I want to talk about those possibilities. Now, you just mentioned that maybe it could have been alcohol poisoning.
Sure.
But Dr. Cannon, alcohol poisoning doesn't account for the pesticide that was found in Petrio's body.
No, it doesn't. And like I said, we get exposed to pesticides all the time. Honestly, there's probably pesticides in your system right now. Anytime we eat a fruit or a vegetable from the grocery store without properly washing it, we can get exposed.
Well, Dr. Cannon, you would agree with me that pesticides, especially isofenphos pesticides, are very dangerous.
When consumed in large quantities, yes.
Dr. Cannon, you'd agree that that pesticide was found in Genesis Petrio's stomach.
Yes, it was found in Genesis Petrio's stomach, but the stomach, as it digests things, can churn food together. So it's impossible to tell where that pesticide actually came from.
Well, Dr. Cannon, you just mentioned the stomach can churn food together. They actually tested the individual contents of Petrio's stomach, didn't they?
Yes, they did.
And when they did that, they tested each individual piece of food that they found in his stomach.
Yes, that's correct.
And each individual piece of food they tested showed no sign at all of pesticide.
Yes, but isofenphos can actually stick around in your system for a really long time. So we can't rule out that the pesticide could have come from a piece of food that was digested a long time ago.
Dr. Cannon, only one thing in Petrio's stomach showed any sign of pesticide.
That would be the liquid in her stomach, yes.
And more specifically, Dr. Cannon, that liquid was wine.
Yes.
The wine in Petrio's stomach was the only thing that showed traces of pesticide.
Yes, that is correct.
And Dr. Cannon, you also agree that Genesis Petrio's blood was tested.
Yes.
And when his blood was tested, it also showed signs of that same pesticide.
Yes, the isofenphos. But again, as I said, it's really impossible to tell where that actually came from.
Well, Dr. Cannon, you say that, but you would agree with me that it is highly unlikely that the pesticide in Petrio's body came from anywhere else besides that wine.
It's unlikely, yes, but in a case that deals with things as heavy as death, we need to consider and explore all possibilities.
Well, Dr. Cannon, it's not just unlikely, it's highly unlikely.
Yes.
Now, Dr. Cannon, you would even agree with me that there is compelling evidence that the wine that Petrio drank contained pesticide.
There is compelling evidence that the wine bottle itself contained pesticide, as it was tested after the fact and did test positive for those chemicals. However, I think—
Dr. Cannon, I wasn't asking yet about that wine bottle. I'm asking, did the wine in Petrio's body, was there compelling evidence that that wine contained pesticide?
Yes, but again, it's not the only possibility.
Now, Dr. Cannon, you mentioned another bottle of wine, right?
The same bottle of wine that Genesis had been drinking.
The same bottle of wine that Genesis was drinking was tested for pesticides.
It was tested for pesticides and it did test positive. However, it's important to note that that wine was found in the same trash bin that contained another bottle of pesticides, which cross-contamination could have occurred.
No, but Dr. Cannon, the pesticide in that bottle of wine was the same exact pesticide that was inside of Genesis Petrillo.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? The internet cut out.
Sorry. The pesticide found in that bottle of wine was the same type of pesticide that was in Petrillo's stomach.
Yes, it's actually an incredibly common brand of pesticide, and there are a lot of different varieties of it.
No further
Time,
questions.
Your Honor.
Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. I just ask that our witness be allowed to step down.
All right, Dr. Cannon, you're excused.
And with that,
Any-
Your Honor, the defense rests.
All right. We're doing pretty good on time. All losses at 9:50, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
In that case, let's do a 10-minute recess. We'll reconvene closer to 9 minutes. We'll reconvene at 9:20 p.m. Central.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, are both sides back? And are my co-judges back?
I'm here.
I am as well.
All right. In that case, the defense has rested. We will proceed to closing arguments. Plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor. Genesis, it has come to this. The wedding can't happen. I need you out of our lives. Leave Casey, and the enclosed $300,000 is yours. Otherwise, I'll take you out of the picture the hard way. Don't make it come to that. Members of the jury, what I just read to you, you've already seen today in trial. It's a note written by the defendant to Genesis Petrillo. The defendant didn't deny writing this note. This note was the last straw in a series of attempts by the defendant to cancel this wedding. You heard how the defendant tried to talk her son out of marrying Genesis Petrillo, how the defendant tried to break up their relationship, how the defendant threatened Genesis Petrillo. Finally, the defendant resorted to this bribe, $300,000. She needed Genesis out of her life. And when this bribe didn't work, like you heard today, the defendant was all out of options and all out of time. Members of the jury, today we as the plaintiff had a responsibility. We had the burden to prove to you by a preponderance of the evidence a few things. We had to prove to you that the defendant intentionally put pesticide in a bottle of wine, that the defendant gave that bottle of wine to Genesis Petrillo, and that the pesticide in that wine was the cause of Petrillo's death. We had a burden, members of the jury. Like my co-counsel said at the beginning of this trial, this isn't a criminal case. Because of that, we don't have to prove to you this claim beyond a reasonable doubt. We don't have to prove it to you 100% certainty. Because members of the jury, our burden today is more likely than not. And at the end of this trial, once everything's said and done, if you're just more than 50% confident that the defendant did all of these things, then you must find her liable for battery. And members of the jury, today the plaintiff met our burden. Today the plaintiff called a few witnesses. Remember the testimony of Lonnie Paris. Miss Paris told you that she was in the winery on June 7th, 2019, that she saw the defendant walking out of a room with a bottle of Cara wine, and that she saw where the wine had been just a few minutes before in that same room was replaced by something she hadn't seen before, a nearly empty canister of pesticide. And when she tested this pesticide, and you have these tests in evidence, members of the jury, they showed that the pesticide in that can was the same exact type of pesticide that was in Genesis Petrillo's body. The same exact type of pesticide that was found in the empty bottle of wine that Petrillo had been drinking from. Members of the jury, today you heard that pesticides are incredibly dangerous. You heard from Angel Rodriguez, who was also at the winery on June 7th. And Ms. Rodriguez told you some very important things, members of the jury. Ms. Rodriguez told you she saw the defendant walk into that kitchen holding a canister of pesticide, same canister that Lonnie Paris saw. Members of the jury, Ms. Rodriguez also told you about some statements made by the defendant, how the defendant said that pesticide was for Genesis, because Genesis was such a pest. Ms. Rodriguez also told you she heard Genesis say, "Watch out for Harper. I think she's trying to kill me." Members of the jury, on that day, Genesis Petrillo knew the danger he was in. Just didn't know where it would come from. He didn't know it would come from the wine. Members of the jury, we've proven to you that the defendant put pesticide in that wine. She gave that bottle of wine to Petrillo, and that the pesticide killed him. But one question you might still have is why? Why would the defendant poison her soon-to-be son-in-law? The answer comes from this letter, members of the jury. The defendant could not have this wedding happen. I need you out of our lives. The defendant was all out of time and all out of options. Find the defendant liable for battery.
All right. Defense?
May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury, may it please the court. Bad blood is not battery. Today, you have heard a lot of testimony. You have been told a story by the plaintiff, a story filled with hatred, plotting, and death. But I want to take a step back. I want to talk about why we are actually here and about what actually happened on June 7th, 2019. The eve of the wedding of Genesis Petrillo and Casey Soto. The months leading up to this important day were full of planning and preparation. But with multiple people planning events such as these comes conflict. Harper Martini and Genesis Petrillo did not see eye to eye. They disagreed. They fought. But bad blood is not battery. In the end, they both wanted the same thing, for this wedding to be the best it could be for Casey Soto. Despite the tension between the two, Ms. Martini did everything she could to make amends with her future son-in-law. She reached out, offering to talk things over. She even presented Mr. Petrillo with a token of peace, a bottle of Cara wine meant to start the happy union off on a good note. But ladies and gentlemen of the jury, that token of peace has been turned into an instrument of war by the plaintiff. What happened on that fateful night was a horrible tragedy. And when tragedy strikes, people look for someone to blame. And for this blame, they chose Harper Martini. The plaintiff has come before you and tried to convince you that Harper Martini poisoned Genesis Petrillo. They have woven together a story that tries to convince you that Harper Martini was filled with so much hatred for Genesis Petrillo that they were driven to poisoning them. But this tapestry is nothing more than a shoddy patch job because bad blood is not battery. As the defense, we bear no burden in today's case. The burden relies solely on the plaintiff. It is their duty to prove three things to you, each by a preponderance of the evidence. First, that there was an act by the defendant. Second, that there was an intent to cause harm. And finally, that as a direct and proximate result, the plaintiff suffered harm. If they fail to prove any of these three things, you cannot find Harper Martini liable for civil battery. And today, the plaintiff has not proven this. They have not shown that their story is the most likely case. They have asked you to believe that the most likely scenario is that the tale you have been fed about a hateful parent-in-law poisoning the person meant to marry their only child is true. But members of the jury, bad blood is not battery. Today, the plaintiff brought before you three witnesses to try and convince you of their narrative. First, they brought Casey Soto, the son of Harper Martini. They tried to show an emotionally charged relationship between mother and son, but what they actually showed was the love that a mother has in their child. And how did this son repay their mother? By continuously surprising them with major life decisions. a long-term relationship, a marriage, a move across the globe to France. It was no wonder that Harper Martini had a less than favorable reaction. She was entirely surprised. Next, they brought before you Lonnie Paris, a journalist with a job at stake. They used Ms. Paris to try and prove Harper Martini's intent, but what they only showed was Ms. Paris's own dishonesty. She routinely disguised herself and trespassed on Peony Estates. She broke into a restricted area that she had no business being in, and also showed that the authorities were threatened to be involved. In fact, she was also caught contradicting what she swore was true and accurate in court today. All they showed with Ms. Paris was deception after deception, both inside and out of the courtroom. Finally, they brought before you Angel Rodriguez, a witness who loves being the center of attention. But when she was asked a question on whether or not the defendant, Harper Martini, hated Genesis Petrillo, she could not answer. She could not answer because there was no hatred. And in fact, she even put a sip of this Cara wine into her own mouth, and she is here to testify today. They also tried to show that Harper Martini did actually poison because she saw Harper Martini with a canister of pesticide. But what Angel Rodriguez actually saw was the owner of a winery located by a swamp with pesticides. She saw an employee doing her job. In fact, the plaintiff, they actually could not definitively say that they saw pesticide anywhere near the bottle of Cara wine. In fact, the plaintiff could not provide one credible witness who definitively saw pesticide near the exact bottle that was given to Genesis Petrillo. Now, as the defense, we again bear no burden in today's case. We have absolutely nothing to prove today. The burden of proof is simply not ours, but however, we still brought before you 3 witnesses who reinforced the simple truth that the plaintiff fell entirely short of the burden required of them by law. We heard today from Harper Martini herself, who told you of her countless attempts to repair her relationship with Ms. Petrillo. You were shown how Ms. Martini prioritizes Casey Soto and his happiness over her own. Despite her son's decision to marry Genesis Petrillo, Ms. Martini did her very best to make the relationship work. Even though Mr. Petrillo was constantly difficult and argumentative, Ms. Martini did everything she could to get along with her soon-to-be son-in-law. She tried to meet over lunch and talk, but Mr. Petrillo avoided her. Ms. Martini helped plan and even pay for the wedding, and to top it all off, she gave Genesis Petrillo a bottle of her best wine as a final attempt to make peace between the two of them. Time after time, Ms. Martini made the effort to put the fighting aside for her son's sake, but Petrillo could not overlook their issues. Secondly, you heard from Austin Lewis, the man in charge of pesticides and its usage at Peony Estates. He explained the careful process he oversees to keep pesticides away from the winemaking process at all costs. He also told us of the one time he was not present to make sure his instructions were followed, that the grapes that were turned into the batch of wine that we all know as Cara. He told us of Peony Estates' heavy use of pesticides across the entire property, including the bottling and wine areas. Pesticides were everywhere, and there was no way to tell what's contaminated and what was not. But what he could tell was Harper Martini's love for Casey Soto, and that Miss Martini would never put her son's happiness in jeopardy. Finally, Dr. Cannon came before you and talked to you about what actually caused the death of Genesis Petrillo. She shed light on the hasty assumptions and rash decisions of the emergency room doctor. And she instead presented you with the facts that pesticides were not the only cause of death to be considered. In fact, the actual cause of death aligns just as well with alcohol poisoning. Not only that, but Dr. Cannon shared with us information that the plaintiff would rather you not know, that there is in fact no real test for pesticides in the bloodstream. The plaintiff came before you today and accepted their burden gladly, the burden to show that Harper Martini purposefully put wine in the bottle on June 7th. Yet they've continuously referred to that night as the accident. Their story is so unlikely that they themselves have a hard time sticking to it. They also tried to tell you that the defendant did this and the defendant did that the defendant was out of time and she did what she had to do. However, we showed you who this defendant really is. A mother named Harper Martini. And Harper Martini loves Casey Soto. She proved this every single day. She planned and paid for the wedding of her only child to a person that she did not like.
Your Honor, I believe that's time. If the defense has a different time, they can let me know.
No, Your Honor.
All right.
And Your Honor, may I give a rebuttal?
Go ahead.
The defense is right. Bad blood doesn't mean battery. But members of the jury, in this case, we're not talking about just bad blood. We're not talking about a little squabble between family members. Members of the jury, bad blood doesn't mean a $300,000 bribe. Bad blood doesn't mean threats to someone's life. Doesn't mean I'll take you out of the picture the hard way. Members of the jury, we see in this case what the defendant showed to Genesis Petrillo was a little bit more than just bad blood. That was because the defendant was out of time, out of options. She was desperate and angry. She hated Genesis Petrillo. And as she said in her own words, I need you out of our lives. Find the defendant liable.
All right. Thank you very much. All right. So take a few moments to have all the judges finish their ballots. Judges, let me know when you're done so we can begin giving comments.
My ballot's submitted.
I believe mine is as well.
All right.
And Your Honor, just one question. Do we need to wait for the people from the tournament to come back and sort of confirm that everything's okay before we start giving comments? I know that's how it usually works in a real in-person tournament. So,
Okay, fair point. I'll go ahead and email the tournament director to make sure.
Yeah, we shouldn't have to wait for them. If you just want to text the tab room director, he should be able to tell you if we're all good or not.
Will do. All right, got the Good to go. So, how about we do this? I'll let my co-judges go ahead and start. Luke, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So, hey, I'm a third year law student at Baylor Law School. And I just signed up to help judge y'all. So should I go ahead and give my comments or?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, cool. So first off, y'all did a great job. Very professional. A lot of my comments are actually pretty substantive, which is really good. So that's really positive. I don't have to yell at you guys for saying "and" 50 times, which that's awesome. Very impressive. Okay, so let's just start at the beginning. Openings. I thought your openings were pretty good. The biggest problem I have with the openings is you didn't give me any bit of a road ramp, any lead up. So as an ordinary juror, I'm sitting there going, Genesis, vineyard, wine bottle, what? It was very fast. So I was very lost in the first sentences until I got it. It took me to about halfway through the opening where I was like, okay, I kind of get what this case is about. So I know this is all a pretend scenario, but in real life, your juror is going to need a little bit more help to get there. They haven't been living with this case like y'all have. So let's say, okay, big substantive thing was hearsay. Hearsay is super complicated and most judges and lawyers don't understand it. Two things to know. It's an out-of-court statement offered for the truth of the matter asserted is hearsay. Every time there's an out-of-court statement, there is a hearsay problem you need to be looking out for. So a lot of times y'all would be pulling up documents with hearsay problems in them and nobody's saying anything. And that's kind of a red flag. So just every time you have an out-of-court statement, if he says, well, she said that, you should give a hearsay objection, right? I mean, I understand there's some things like opposing parties, right? So you will go, okay, I'll let that go. But there was a lot of instances where I was like, you probably should have objected to hearsay for that one. And your objection is, Your Honor, they're offering it for the truth of the matter asserted, and that's not. And the response to that is, well, Your Honor, there's this exception, or we're not offering it for the truth of the matter asserted, but for, and then ... whatever you're offering it for. But just having that clear grasp of hearsay would help you out a lot, especially with the hearsay within hearsay. That's where we got hearsay on the surface and then hearsay inside. When that happens and you say objection, hearsay within hearsay, right? The defense is not going to, should come back and explain why it's not hearsay and have an explanation for why the surface isn't hearsay and then the individual statement isn't hearsay. The defense needs 2 levels of hearsay answers. Just saying, oh, it's business records doesn't solve the hearsay within hearsay. Okay, great. The surface level is taken care of, but the underneath hearsay is still a problem. So just a thought there. Oh, this is another thing that bothered the heck out of me, but it's just because I've done this a little times. When you're with exhibits, the way I was taught is true and correct copy, fair and accurate depiction. So if it's a photograph or image, it's fair and accurate depiction. If it's written, it's true and correct copy. That's the way I was taught. I don't know about y'all, but just be aware that depending on the judge you're in front of, that can be off-putting if they're not used to it. And again, you may have to take this back to your coaches and say, this is the way we were always told to do it. So just pay attention to that. Oh, cross-examination. So you all did really good on cross and direct. Thought you had some really great questions. The biggest problem was on cross-examination, you would come up with complicated questions where you're asking, did you see this and this? Well, right there, you're giving them a ton of room to fight you on. They can go, well, no, I didn't see that. And I also didn't see that, and explain why and blah, blah, blah. And then before you know it, you lost your cross-examination witness. Cross is all about controlling the witness. And if you make the question too complicated, the witness either gets confused or they take your room and run with it. And this is true if they have like a really aggressive witness. None of your witnesses were too aggressive against you on cross, but if you get one, they're going to really take you for a ride. If you give them a lot of open-ended question or a complicated question, they're just going to be like, well, here's why I didn't do this. So that's a thought. One more thing too. I noticed that you had I think it was the defense had the main defendant had her say, I didn't poison this gentleman, right? Or something to that effect. You can go ahead and emphasize for the jury, hey, this is under oath. She is under penalty of perjury to testify. She's got to be truthful today. You want to hit that hard so that the jury's like, wow, this is significant. Because otherwise the jury's going to be like, oh, well, sometimes people lie, sometimes people tell the truth, whatever. It helps reinforce that and then helps you kind of shield against cross, because you can say, well, no, in trial, I testified under oath and I was truthful that I didn't do it. So just kind of reinforcing that. Two more things. Closings, we're good. The only thing with closings is make sure you shorten them up a little bit and focusing on the elements. Don't make them too confusing or everybody starts to drift off a little bit. And then the second thing was with the exhibit of the timeline. That was great, really good. I like that exhibit. The only problem with that is you never explain to the jury what you're doing while you're doing it. So these numbers will just pop up on the screen and the jury may not pay attention to it and then be like, oh, wait, there's numbers there. And then they're automatically distracted from whatever you were talking about because now they have to go back and read all these numbers. So definitely talk it through with them, make it nice and slow, because the jury likes to be taken through things in a nice orderly fashion so they can understand it. And then when they take it back to the jury room, they can be like, well, she explained it this way. And this was so interesting to me. So that's just a suggestion. But yeah, I think otherwise y'all did really good.
I wanted to second that. This was my first time watching a mock trial and it was very put together. I could tell you all had worked really, really hard on it. And then from that, it was one really difficult to jump in where you all were in the material. So if you could do a better job of slowing down at the beginning, explaining what you're talking about, especially because anytime you put something up or anytime you were asking those complicated questions, like Luke did say, it was difficult to follow if it was the first time that I was hearing it. And I know that we didn't really get the materials far enough in advance for me to catch on to everything that you all were saying. And that would be what most of the jury would see as well. So taking your time, slowly explaining those things so that those points hit home, because sometimes it would be like 2 or 3 questions later. And then I would be like, oh, that was like a really good point. And then from that later on, I really like the way that you all wrapped up your closing statements, including the content from the trial to re-emphasize the things that you thought were major hitters for your cases. But they did go on a little too long and I was losing that momentum that you had halfway through. But other than that, really good job.
All right. I'll try to keep my comments as well pretty brief because it is getting late. I will say, just to qualify, I'm also a law student at Baylor Law. I have done mock trial for 4 years. I was the president and now the coach of the University of Houston mock trial team. So I have lots of opinions, and you'll probably see that in my comments too, the specific comments when you get to see those. I guess some general things that I think I should address for everyone. Definitely make sure that you're working within your time limits as closely as possible. It really hurt on the defense when you didn't really get to wrap up as well as I thought you could have, just because of time. And I don't know, I guess that's just something that you're going to have to work with your timekeeper a little more on. Make sure that you keep getting updates so you know, 1 minute warning, 30-second warning, 10-second warning, something like that. You could even, if the opposing counsel and the judge agrees to it, you might even consider posting those times in the chat. That's what I saw when I judged at Rochester a few weeks ago. And that wasn't too distracting. So you might want to consider that as long as everyone else agrees. Let's see. I would have liked to hear a little more about the theme from the plaintiff, especially in the opening and the closing. I liked how the defense weaved their theme through their openings and closings pretty often. And that's just, remember, your theme years are your hook. It's like your thesis statement. It's what you want the jury to remember when they go back to the deliberation room, and one of the jurors is going to say, well, bad blood doesn't mean battery. The plaintiff, you want to do something kind of similar and make sure you repeat it often enough for them to remember. As far as objections go, one thing I'll say, moving forward, make sure that when you're preparing your directs and your crosses, you should anticipate, you should know what objections you can watch out for. Now, you might not be able to prepare for every single one, but definitely for things like hearsay, should be easy to spot, and you should be able to think of how you're going to argue that objection, or how are you going to argue that response ahead of time, so that once you get to the round, you can deliver without hesitation, without stuttering. And so moving forward, I do highly recommend that you do that. Let's see. I wish I didn't submit my comments because I can't go back and see it. Onto some positive things. I really, really thoroughly enjoyed the presentation all around, especially from the attorneys, especially those giving the jury addresses. I thought your deliveries was very emphatic and just very zealous, which I appreciate. I have a theater background, so I am also very dramatic. And for witnesses, there were a couple of times that I noticed some witnesses explaining a little more than they probably needed to. For sure, you should explain when necessary in order to not just concede everything to the opposing side. But when you keep explaining, especially explaining a point that you've done already, you start to sound more defensive. And honestly, if it gets to that point, that should be a signal to your directing attorney that maybe I should redirect, time permitting, of course, redirect on that point to rehabilitate the witness and make sure that the explanation comes out in full force and that the jury remembers that explanation. If you try to do it too much on cross-examination, you just sound defensive, dodgy, and it kind of hurts your credibility a little bit. So the flip side to that, I did notice there were some witnesses who gave really short explanations when necessary, and I appreciated that. You didn't explain more than necessary. You picked your battles, in other words, and I appreciated that. That's all I had that I can think of right now. Do any of you have any specific questions?
Thank you so much for coming and judging us late on a Friday night. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for judging.
Yes,
Thank
thank you
you.
guys.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you all. This has been wonderful and fun to watch. And I wish you all the best of luck the rest of this weekend.